I'm going to start with a question for you, Mr. Prevasic. In your testimony, you noted that positive train control for all of its benefits cannot cut a road crossing, spot a terrorist, back up a train, make an air test, nor can it secure a train. And I think you hit there on something very important, not just with respect to what we're discussing here in the railroad industry, but one of the fundamental issues that we're going to be facing as a country, as an economy in the years ahead, and it's a complicated one. To what extent do we allow machines to replace people? And I hope we can agree that just because something can be automated doesn't mean that it should be. Some cases we should go there, some cases maybe not. So I wanted to ask you if you wanted to elaborate a little bit more on that theme, on the importance of having human beings on board a train to do what technology either cannot do or should not do.
Yes, thank you, and I do concur with your comments on maybe we should, as society, take a look at, is it desirable? Just because we can, does that mean we want to? And I'll use autonomous operations as an example. For years now, we've been working on autonomous cars. They're always going to be here next year. You're going to see them driving around on the roads. That was 3, 4, 5 years ago that we first started hearing about that. It is not yet implemented today. That autonomous automobile cannot tell the difference between the box on the side of the road or a baby on the side of the road. And with respect to train operations, there's a feel for operating a train that comes from years of experience that can't be duplicated, even though there may be technology that comes to the forefront that will start a train at point A, take it down the track and stop at point B. That's good, but there are a lot of things that happen during that trip, the intervening time between point A and point B. A well-rested operating crew is observing thousands of things. They're handling multitudes of tasks, obligations, and in addition to that, no one has ever successfully explained to me how a train blocking a crossing with the ambulance on one side and the hospital on the other can be either cut itself in two so that the ambulance can get through, or even with one person, how they manage to do that. Just because technology may permit something to happen doesn't mean that we as society need for it to happen.
Thank you. You heard my question to Mr. Vittori about the 3-mile train and how long it would take a single operator to walk all the way back. What did you think of his answer, that if he's a good walker, maybe in 2 hours he could go back and forth and that's just fine? Is that fine?
It's even more complicated than that. It may take 2 hours to walk from one end to the other, but that doesn't account for whatever reason is evident for you making that walk. It doesn't account for doing it in Minnesota in the wintertime, in Arizona in the summertime. It doesn't account for the fact that maybe some work needs to be done partway down the train, if not at the very end of the train. And that work being, let's cut the crossing, for example. Well, one person can't do that. The engineer is up on the head of the train waiting to take direction from his team member, the conductor, who's actually on site doing the work at the location in the train that it needs to be done. It's unreasonable and unworkable to suggest that we're not going to block crossings, that breakdowns and occurrences are never going to happen, and that if they do, either one person or autonomy can handle the situation out there. Operating a train 3 miles long through communities with hazardous materials is a big deal. Yesterday we saw a derailment in Nevada. Someone had the idea that maybe they should put a munitions train onto a regular train that had hazardous materials in it and put empties in the middle. Now, if you know anything about railroading, you don't do that. They did that. It's something that, again, the demands of operating a 2-mile-long train, 3-mile-long train is ridiculous, but 2-mile-long train or less, Those demands require 2 people on the crew, and I've been doing this for a long time. I can testify in front of any forum that it's essential that we do crews that can adequately operate the train in a safe manner, that the employees are not at risk, and that the public is not at risk.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, if I could have just a moment to ask one question on the, yeah, thank you. I wanted to ask you, Mr. Jeffries, on the LNG issues, because my understanding is that you support the allowing LNG to move on these 113 cars. I asked this question to Mr. Batory, and to say that he did a miserable job justifying it would be an understatement, so I'm going to give you a chance.
In 2017, the AAR filed to Pipeline Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, PHMSA, to have LNG be added to the list of authorized materials that it is allowed to transport. We haven't gotten any action from PHMSA since that date, but we certainly support that proposal and would be happy to come in and brief you on the basis for that.
You heard Chairman DeFazio's comments and my question. You have no safety concerns about 100-car trains carrying this substance in cars that can contain 4 times as much as is currently allowed?
Railroads are going to operate any trains they operate at the highest level of safety. And we stand by our proposal and our filing in 2017 at PHMSA. May I respond to your prior question?
Of course.
So I think, there's a lot of talk about 2 and 3 mile long trains. If you look at the data, the average train length in this country right now is 6,000 feet. It has hovered around that since 2010. Of course, there are longer trains out there. No one's denying that. I think all the railroads have been public about trains upwards of 15,000 feet in certain limited circumstances, and not to say trains, may not grow beyond 6,000 feet. But I think that there's a lot of data that's thrown around, or a lot of points that are thrown around there that aren't backed up by data, and I think it's important to make that point. But regardless of train length, the railroad is going to operate to the highest level of safety on infrastructure that can manage that. And
regardless of train length. So, I mean, it's just sort of a blanket statement. It's easy to say, no matter what the length of the train, no matter what we do, we will always operate at the highest level of safety. And yet, you're suggesting there's no relationship between the objective fact of how long a train is or how many people are on the train manning it and assuring safety. You expect us to be satisfied by that blanket assertion.
Railroads are going to operate to the highest level of safety, regardless of train length, and they're going to operate train lengths that are appropriate for their infrastructure. And
we're trying to determine what is the appropriate length.
I'm not the one who makes that decision.
Well,
but
maybe we are, so we'll take it from there. Thank you.
And to your point on number of folks in the cab, our point is that it doesn't make sense to mandate current operating practice in perpetuity. Having 2 individuals physically located inside the cab of a locomotive at all time. This FRA is on record stating there is no safety basis. The prior FRA, in its preamble to its rule, said they have no data to show that 2 is safer than 1. NTSB sat in this hearing room in 2016, said they had no data to show that 2 is safer than 1. So that's not our data. And we have trains operating all over this country right now. Most Amtrak trains, commuter trains, and short line trains often operate with 1 in the cab. Our point is it doesn't make sense to mandate current operating practice in perpetuity.
Well, it strikes me as common sense, but we will continue the conversation. Thank you.